Yes, I'm having you complete an ed puzzle because this information is important and I want to make sure you actually watch this video. So this video is going to be a review of glazing in ceramics, and I'm going to include important reminders and new information included because you do have different glazes than what most of you had used in 3D1 because we are doing this via distance learning. So remember that clay shrinks. So you had your work, it was one size when it was greenware. Greenware is clay that is not fired. Then when it was fired in the kiln and it became bisqueware, it shrank a little bit. And then once we apply the glaze and we fire it one more time, then it shrinks a little bit more. So what does glaze do? Remember, glaze, it makes your artwork look colorful. It adds a shiny texture to it. It can make it smoother, and it also makes it waterproof. So waterproof is, I think, the biggest reason why we glaze our ceramic projects, especially if you want it to be functional. It adds strength because, the clay is still fragile after it's been glaze fired, but glaze helps add an extra coating, right? Think of it like an eggshell, right? Yes, you can break eggs, but it does create a protective coating. And it allows us to use the sculpture, right? First thing you're glazing is your darted cup, and you might want to use that for liquid or not, but you never know. So why glaze clay? Well, if we leave the clay unglazed, the clay, the bisqueware, is very porous, like a sponge. And because of that, any liquid that gets on it will become absorbed. And if it doesn't evaporate in time, it can cause bacteria and mold to grow. So yes, if we painted our projects instead of using glaze, well, you don't want to leave it outside because any of the bare bisque areas could absorb liquid. And remember that glaze changes color. So the raw glaze is not always indicative of the final fired glaze color. So you can see that in the before and after pictures here. This is not my photo, but it is a good way to illustrate how some colors actually change due to the firing. And there are different ways to describe glaze, and this is the new part that I add in 3D too. So glaze that is transparent, it means you can see through it. Think of water as being transparent, right? Ice is fairly transparent. So there are glazes that are transparent. They might have a little bit of color to them, but you can see through it very well. The opposite of transparency would be opaque. Opaque is you cannot see through it. So this example here, the clay is not actually green and blue. It's probably that color there, an orangey beige color, but this type of glaze is opaque. Some glazes are considered glossy, which would be shiny. And there are glazes that are matte. Matte means not shiny, similar to how makeup products are shiny or matte. The glazes that you are using, just a reminder, they are food safe. So that's a good thing. So you could potentially eat out of your projects if you wanted to. But what makes a glaze non-food safe? Because usually glazes that are orange or red, because they tend to have lead in it. The lead makes the glaze flow at a lower temperature. Now the glazes you are using, they do not have lead, so they are food safe. But glazes that are not food safe, they have a high dosage of toxic chemicals that can actually leach into liquid. So that's why some glazes are not food safe. So some reminders when you get into your glazing, as well as some new information that is relevant to what you have from your glaze kit. Remember that glaze becomes permanent when it's fired, which means we can't remove it after it's been glaze fired. It's stuck on the surface. It becomes like this glass coating. Remember not to glaze the bottom of your sculpture because when we fire it, if it gets stuck to the kiln shelf, that's a problem. Of course, Miss J is smart and does make sure that you don't glaze the bottom, but if you do, I'm going to have to wipe your bottom to make sure that we don't have anything like this happening. The more layers of glaze that you use, the more saturated your color will be. That's something to think about. If you only use one layer of glaze, your colors will be mostly transparent. And in 3D1, I taught you that you wanted 3 solid coats of glaze. That's for every color that you're using. And 3 coats of glaze guarantees better coverage and color. The color looks more saturated. Now, what's been changed is your glaze that you use is called underglaze, the glaze that I gave you. That's why if you look at the top of the lid, it says UG and the color. UG stands for underglaze. It is a type of glaze. So this picture here is a glaze tile, and it shows you what happens when you use 1 coat, 2 coats, 3 coats, 4 coats, and 5 coats of red. So again, your glaze is underglaze. What is underglaze? So underglaze is technically like a slip mixed with a colorant. Now yours is not actually made of clay, but that's what keeps it a very more liquidy stage versus maybe thicker as you would expect from regular glaze. Think of it like a liquid colored clay. You can apply underglaze at the greenware stage. Greenware is clay that has not been fired, such as here. Or you can use underglaze at the bisqueware stage, and I'm having you use underglaze at the bisqueware stage. So underglaze actually appears matte, not shiny, when it's fired. So this is a picture here of a ceramic box one of my students made several years ago. This uses a technique called sgraffito. This is what we would normally be learning in 3D2. So you can actually draw on the clay. So you can see blue and black. This has been fired, but it doesn't have clear glaze on it. So after we use clear glaze, which you can see in this example, notice how the black is much more saturated, right? It looks more like a pure black. Here it looks kind of chalky, a little pastel. So clear glaze, we add that to the underglaze before we glaze fire it. Clear glaze, the one that we use is actually pink, looks like that. It's pink because we need to know where we used it. Now you will not be using clear glaze. Your teacher, will be applying the clear glaze for you. It's pretty easy, it's just 3 coats, no worries. But clear glaze is going to make your colors pop. Without the clear glaze, your colors are going to be a bit dull. Now remember, when you put your 3 coats on, I won't know. So 3 to 4 coats is good. 5, you can get away with 5 coats. But again, I will only know how many coats you used after it's been fired. This is a tile that also uses sgraffito, but we can see this is using the color blue. This is before it is fired. This is after it's been fired with the clear glaze. Again, look at the amount of saturation, right? Much more vibrant. These are 2 examples of coil bowls that were created last school year, and they use underglaze. They applied the underglaze to the coil bowls when they were in the bisqueware stage, and then we applied clear glaze on it, and we put all of that into the kiln. So yes, the work had like 3, 4, 5 coats of glaze. It had 3 coats for the color and 3 coats for the clear glaze, and the colors look very vibrant. So how is underglaze different from glaze? Because it is technically different. So it stains the surface. Underglaze is highly pigmented. You can use underglaze on bisqueware, but you can also apply it to greenware before it is fired. You can actually apply it before you glaze. You can actually use both, but you have to start with underglaze, and then you would put regular glaze on top. When it's fired, the colors look pretty much similar to when it's wet. That's the nice thing. So the colors that you use, they'll look fairly similar, obviously much more saturated. And it doesn't flow like glaze, which means it stays exactly where you apply it. And I'll show you when I do my demo how you can actually get very painterly effects with your underglaze. So which one's better, right? Because usually students are like, well, is one better than the other? It just depends on the results that you want. There are artists that work with both underglaze and regular glaze. The pros of underglaze is you can mix them together to create new colors like paint. So that's the new thing. You can mix your colors together. The colors are similar after firing. It's really good for detailed work, and you can even draw with it. For example, they do create pencils. These look like colored pencils, but these are actually underglaze pencils. You can draw on the surface with underglaze. The cons of underglaze is it can be a little difficult to cover large areas. I would say you need a good brush for that. It does require 3 to 4 coats, or it will appear streaky when it's fired. And if your coats are too thick, it can chip off after firing. I've seen this happen before with a couple of my students' works. It's kind of annoying. It just looks like cracked skin. So now we're going to move into a demo, which you're going to be seeing next on a different page. So the demo is going to review setting up your workspace for glazing, planning your colors, demonstrating how the underglaze works, like you'll see it in action in the video, using the supplies that's in your glaze kit, and how to clean up underglaze.